What if I told you that the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility could also be the architect of a kingdom's destruction? That one of the most adored deities in African mythology brought a mighty empire to ruin, not with war or fire, but with silence and water. Her name is Oshun. She was the river's grace, the golden mother, the giver of sweetness and life. But when disrespected, when forgotten, her silence became a curse, and her waters became a flood. This is the story of Oshun, the goddess who cherished her people, and yet drowned their kingdom for its arrogance. The downfall of Asebele began not with a battle, but with a divine withdrawal, and a king, blinded by pride, sealed the fate of his land. But before the river vanished, before the wrath came crashing down, we must go back to when Oshun first walked among mortals, to the moment she rose from the sacred waters and became an Orisha, not just of beauty, but of power, mystery, and divine justice. So, sit back, because this is African Myths Unveiled. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have a quick question for you. I know that many of you are tuning in from different parts of the world, all united by a love for African mythology. So, I'd love to reconnect. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I'll be in the comment section engaging with you. And if you're enjoying the content, a like and subscription would mean the world to me. All right, let's get back to the story. In the beginning, when the world was new, the Orishas walked among mortals, shaping the earth, guiding the stars, and bringing balance to the forces of nature. Among them was Oshun, the goddess of love, beauty, fertility, and the rivers. But her story is one of struggle, power, and transformation. A tale that reveals how even the most nurturing of deities can carry within them a wrath that can shake the very foundations of the earth. Oshun was born from the river itself, flowing from the deepest depths of the earth, where the waters met the unknown. Legend has it that, in the earliest days of creation, the river itself was without form, a vast expanse of water, chaotic and untamed. The other Orishas, each charged with their own dominion, looked upon the river and recognized its potential. They saw that this water could bring life, fertilizing the earth, nourishing the crops, and sustaining all living beings. But it also held the power to drown and destroy, to flood the lands and wash away the very essence of existence. It was then that Olodumare, the Supreme Creator, spoke to the Orishas. From the river will come a being who will embody both the nurturing and the destructive forces of water. She will be a goddess who will carry within her the gift of life and the fury of the tides. And so, Oshun emerged, beautiful, radiant, and powerful. From the moment she was born, Oshun was destined to be different from the other Orishas, while others, like Shango or Ogun, wielded the powers of fire, thunder, or iron. Oshun ruled over the realm of water, love, and beauty. She was the river's heartbeat, its soul, its very essence. Her beauty was said to be unmatched, and her voice, like the sound of water flowing over smooth stones, was a melody that could captivate any soul. But Oshun's beauty was not just skin deep. It was a reflection of her immense power. She could bless the land with abundance, bringing rain to parched fields and joy to barren hearts. Women prayed to her for fertility, lovers sought her for her wisdom, and the sick called out to her for healing. She was the goddess of life itself, the giver of both love and prosperity. However, as much as she embodied love and nurturing, Oshun was not a deity to be taken lightly. The people of the ancient kingdom of Asebele revered Oshun, and for good reason. Their prosperity, their crops, their wealth. All of it was a gift from her. When the people prayed, they would gather at the riverbanks, offering gold, honey, and beautiful flowers in reverence to her. In return, Oshun would bless them with abundant harvests, peaceful waters, and fertile lands. The goddess was worshipped as the heart of the kingdom, the one whose smile brought rain, whose tears could end drought, and whose love made all things grow. But there was an unspoken truth about Oshun, a truth that few understood or dared to acknowledge. The goddess of love was not just a nurturing mother figure. She was also a force of nature, capable of bringing about immense destruction when her balance was disrupted. She was revered and feared in equal measure. Men who sought her favor were often driven by their desire to gain her love, while women worshipped her for her beauty, her grace, and the promise of fertility she brought. One of the most powerful aspects of Oshun was her ability to control the flow of water. Rivers, lakes, and oceans were her domain, and the people believed that her power over water was a symbol of her dominion over the emotional currents of the human soul. She could be as calm as a river on a summer's day, or as violent as a storm at sea. To disrespect her was to risk facing the devastating consequences of her wrath. But despite all her power, there was one thing that even Oshun could not control: the human heart. And it was this very thing that would lead to the tragic downfall of the kingdom of Asebele. As the kingdom flourished, its rulers, blinded by their own arrogance, began to take Oshun's blessings for granted. The king of Asebele, King Odawale, had long grown complacent in his power. His advisors whispered words of pride, telling him that the success of the kingdom had nothing to do with divine favor. It was his own wisdom, his own strength, that had brought Asebele to its heights. Odawale, in his heart, believed them, and with this belief came a dangerous disregard for the goddess who had nurtured the kingdom's wealth. He no longer visited the sacred river to offer prayers. No longer did he pay tribute at her temples. In fact, there were whispers that he even mocked the goddess, calling her power superstition. The people began to feel the shift, but they were too afraid to speak out. They too had seen the once glorious river begin to wane. Its waters were not as clear, not as strong as they had been in years past. And yet, despite the ominous signs, they remained silent. They feared what might happen if they went against their king. But Oshun, the goddess of both love and vengeance, could not be ignored for long. Her patience, like the slow flow of a river, had its limits. And soon, the kingdom would learn that there were consequences to disrespecting a goddess who held dominion over life and death. The first signs of her displeasure were subtle. The river's flow began to slow, the once abundant waters now receding. People noticed that the fish no longer swam as freely, that the crops no longer flourished with the same vibrancy. Still, the king did not act. He dismissed the warnings, calling them natural occurrences. But then came the silence. It was in the quiet of night that the people of Asebele first felt the full force of Oshun's wrath. The winds that had once danced through the trees stopped completely. The air became thick, heavy, as if the very earth was holding its breath. The river, once the lifeblood of the kingdom, grew quiet. The water no longer sang with the sounds of life. It had become stagnant, a murky shadow of what it had been, and with it, a deep silence settled over the land. The people began to feel it in their bones. The stillness, the absence of sound, was unbearable. It was as though the world itself had stopped, waiting for something to break the tension. Even the birds, which had once filled the air with their songs, had gone silent. King Odawale, however, still refused to acknowledge the goddess. He insisted that the silence was simply a passing phase, that the river would soon return to its former glory. But deep down, even he could feel the weight of Oshun's presence. She was not gone. She was watching, waiting. The silence would not last forever. The silence of Asebele stretched for days. The air was thick, heavy, as if the very earth had stopped turning. The rivers ran dry, the crops withered, and the people began to lose hope. The kingdom, once a land of prosperity and abundance, was on the brink of collapse. The vibrant life that had filled the streets had faded, leaving only a deep and haunting quiet. King Odawale, despite his pride and stubbornness, could no longer ignore the signs. The once bustling market streets had emptied as famine and drought began to take hold. The very essence of the kingdom's lifeblood, the rivers, had begun to dry up, and with it, the people's faith began to waver. Whispers of the goddess's wrath spread like wildfire, reaching even the ears of the king's closest advisors. "Your Majesty," one of the oldest advisors, an elder named Baba Ade, said cautiously one evening, his voice trembling with a fear he could no longer hide. "The people are restless. They say the goddess Oshun has withdrawn her favor. The river, the source of our strength, is drying up, and no one knows why." King Odawale glared at the old man, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Are you suggesting that Oshun is punishing us?" he asked, his voice cold and dismissive. "We have done nothing to anger her. The river dries up due to nature's will, not because of any goddess." But Baba Ade could not mask the growing terror in his heart. He had seen the signs, felt the weight of Oshun's silence. "My king, the goddess is not like the other forces of nature. She is not to be dismissed so easily. She is the goddess of love, but she is also a goddess of great power. And when her patience runs out, the consequences are dire." King Odawale waved him off with a dismissive gesture. "Enough of this talk. The kingdom will not fall to superstitions. We will find a way to restore the river through human means." But as the days passed, even Odawale could feel the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. The river that had once been the lifeblood of the kingdom was now a mere trickle, its waters dark and lifeless. The once thriving fields lay in ruin, the soil dry and cracked. The people were starving, and a deep despair had settled over the land. And then, one fateful night, the silence was broken. It came without warning. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the land. The air seemed to hum with energy, and the wind stirred, faint at first, but growing stronger by the moment. The once dead river began to ripple, as if something deep beneath its surface had awoken. The people of Asebele were awakened by a sudden violent gust of wind that swept through the streets, carrying with it the scent of rain, sweet and intoxicating. But there was no rain, only the promise of something far more terrifying. From the depths of the river, something stirred. It was not the gentle murmur of the waters, nor the quiet flow they had once known. No, this was different. The water began to churn, turning black and foul, as if the very essence of the river had been corrupted. The once peaceful waters of Oshun now swirled with an ominous power, dark and untamable. It was then that the people heard it, the voice of Oshun. Her voice did not come as a whisper, nor as a cry. It was a roar, a deep, guttural sound that resonated from the very earth itself. It echoed through the streets of Asebele, shaking the buildings to their foundations. The sound of the river was no longer peaceful. It was a warning, and the people knew, deep in their hearts, that Oshun's wrath had been unleashed. "Foolish mortals," the voice boomed, a sound that seemed to come from every corner of the land. "You have taken my blessings for granted. You have forgotten the price of disrespecting the divine forces that sustain you. Now, you will feel the consequences of your arrogance." King Odawale, who had once dismissed the goddess's power, stood frozen in the grand palace, his face pale with terror. He could feel the ground trembling beneath him, the very air thick with an oppressive weight. The once silent river had come alive with fury, and it was clear that nothing could stop the coming storm. And then, as if to prove the goddess's power, the waters of the river surged upwards as though Oshun herself were rising from the depths. The once peaceful river became a violent torrent, crashing against the banks, flooding the land with waves of dark water. The people screamed in terror, running for shelter, but there was no escape. Oshun's wrath was not a single overwhelming strike. It was a slow, deliberate vengeance, as if the goddess were allowing her power to unfold at her own pace, savoring the fear that gripped the kingdom. The once quiet river now roared with a fury that seemed to shake the very heavens, the water rising higher and higher, swallowing the land in its wake. King Odawale stood at the palace window, staring in disbelief as the river surged closer, the floodwaters creeping towards the heart of Asebele. His pride, his arrogance, had led to this moment. The goddess of love, beauty, and fertility was now the goddess of destruction. And all he could do was watch as his kingdom was consumed by the very river that had once been its lifeblood. The people, now scattered and desperate, cried out to Oshun for mercy. But the goddess, in her wrath, did not answer their pleas. There was only silence once more. This time, the silence of the kingdom's fate sealed. As the floodwaters of Oshun's rage swallowed the kingdom, King Odawale understood, far too late, the price of arrogance. He had rejected the goddess's love, and now, in return, he would face the silence of a drowned kingdom. Drowned not just in water, but in the consequences of ignoring the divine. The kingdom of Asebele would never be the same again. The goddess had taken her revenge, and now only the silence remained. Oshun's wrath was not merely a destructive force. It was a lesson, one that spoke to the very heart of human nature and the balance between mortal pride and divine grace. To understand the full meaning of Oshun's actions, we must delve deeper into the cultural relevance of her myth and what her wrath truly signifies. In the kingdom of Asebele, the story of Oshun's wrath was passed down through generations as a cautionary tale. The ancient Yoruba people, like many African cultures, understood that the gods were not distant figures who only interacted with humans in rare moments. Instead, they were ever-present forces in the lives of the people, influencing their daily actions, their relationships, and even their understanding of life and death. The gods were not just abstract concepts. They were real, powerful entities who demanded respect, humility, and recognition. Oshun, in particular, was seen as a goddess who embodied the duality of life itself. She represented love, beauty, and fertility, nurturing both the land and the people. She was the giver of life, the one who smiled upon those who revered her, and in return, she granted them abundance, health, and prosperity. But she also represented the power of water, the very thing that could both nurture and destroy. Water, in many African myths, symbolizes the flow of life itself, and when it is misused or taken for granted, it can quickly turn from a source of sustenance to a force of devastation. Oshun's wrath, as seen in the destruction of Asebele, was a reminder of the delicate balance between human arrogance and divine favor. King Odawale's pride, the belief that he alone was responsible for the kingdom's success, was his downfall. He had forgotten the central lesson that the Yoruba people had long understood. All things, from the harvests to the rivers, were gifts from the gods. To ignore the divine forces that governed life was to risk losing everything. The goddess's decision to withdraw her favor was not an act of senseless vengeance. It was a response to the kingdom's growing disrespect and disregard for the very forces that had sustained it. Oshun's wrath was a divine response to pride, an assertion of her power and the power of the divine over the mortal world. In Yoruba belief, the gods were not to be seen as mere providers or protectors, but as partners in life. When humans failed to acknowledge this partnership, the gods were known to intervene, often in ways that restored balance to the world. But Oshun's wrath, like her love, was not infinite. It was deeply connected to the idea of cycles, the flow of life, death, and rebirth. After the destruction, there was a sense of inevitability, a recognition that this was not the end of the kingdom, but a moment of painful transformation. The floodwaters that consumed Asebele were a symbol of cleansing, of washing away the pride and arrogance that had led to the downfall. It was a reset, an opportunity for the people to rebuild, not just their kingdom, but their relationship with the divine. For the people of Asebele, the myth of Oshun's wrath served as a profound reminder. No kingdom, no empire, no individual could thrive without acknowledging the forces greater than themselves. The gods, including Oshun, demanded respect, and those who took their blessings for granted would find themselves stripped of them. This was not just a lesson for the rulers, but for every individual in the kingdom. It was a call to humility and reverence, a call to remember that prosperity, love, and beauty came from divine forces that required acknowledgement and respect. The myth also holds cultural significance beyond its immediate story. In many African traditions, rivers are sacred spaces that symbolize the flow of life and the connection between the physical and spiritual realms. Oshun, as the goddess of the river, was seen as the conduit between these worlds, guiding the souls of the departed and ensuring that the flow of life remained unbroken. Her power was tied to the natural world, her ability to bring fertility to the land, to heal the sick, to ensure the rains came. But it was also tied to the emotional and spiritual currents of the people. Water, in African spirituality, is not just a physical element. It is deeply symbolic, representing cleansing, renewal, and transformation. The flooding of Asebele was also symbolic of the cleansing power of Oshun. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration. The floodwaters swept away the old, but in their place, something new could grow. This was the essence of Oshun's dual nature. She could destroy, but she could also rebuild. The floodwaters were not the end of Asebele, but a painful beginning. The people, once they had paid the price for their hubris, would need to rebuild not just their kingdom, but their relationship with Oshun. They would have to learn the importance of humility, gratitude, and respect for the divine forces that sustained them. In this way, the myth of Oshun's wrath was a call to the people of Asebele and to us to recognize the balance between human agency and divine will. The rivers, the land, the very air we breathe, they are all gifts, and we are merely caretakers of them. To forget this is to risk losing everything. As the floodwaters of Oshun's wrath receded, the kingdom of Asebele was left in ruins. The once bustling city had been swallowed by the river, its buildings now little more than memories beneath the murky waters. The people, battered and broken, had learned the hard lesson that no amount of human pride or arrogance could ever stand against the power of the divine. But this was not the end for Asebele, for in the aftermath of destruction, there was always the possibility of renewal. The people of Asebele, now humbled, gathered at the banks of the river, their voices quiet but filled with reverence. They had witnessed the goddess's wrath, and they understood, perhaps for the first time, the importance of living in harmony with the divine forces around them. They began to offer their prayers once more, not out of fear, but out of gratitude, the river once again began to flow, its waters slowly returning to life. In time, the kingdom of Asebele would be rebuilt, not just in brick and stone, but in spirit. And Oshun, the goddess of love and rivers, would once again smile upon them. For she was a goddess of second chances. But this time, the people knew the price of disrespect, and they would never forget the lesson Oshun had taught them. The story of Oshun's wrath serves as a powerful reminder that the gods are not to be taken lightly. They are forces that shape the world, that influence the very fabric of life itself. And those who forget this truth do so at their own peril. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the myth of Oshun and the lessons she teaches us. What do you think about the wrath of Oshun? Do you think it's a tale of punishment or a story of transformation and renewal? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your interpretation of this powerful myth. And if you want to learn more about African mythology and the gods and goddesses that shaped it, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Which African mythology would you like me to cover next? Let me know.